Welcome back to A Mighty Fortress Is Our Pod. Today's guest is Janet Walston, a lifelong Lutheran who was married to the late Reverend Richard Walston, who was one of my pastors growing up. Without further ado, my interview with Janet Walston. So I'm here with Janet Walston.
Correct.
You're a lifelong Lutheran.
Yes.
Graduate of Capital.
Yes.
And you were married to the late Reverend Richard Walston, who was my pastor at one point.
That was a good time.
Yes. So thank you for being here, and excited to just talk to you and about your experiences in the church and what you think out of that it means to be Lutheran. And it'll also be interesting, I've done a couple of these interviews with pastors so far, but this will be the first one I've done with a pastor's spouse. So I'm excited to get that perspective as well.
That's so nice of you.
So I guess we can just start with where did you grow up and what was the church that you grew up in like?
Yeah, it was north of Detroit. We started at a church in Roseville, Michigan. And when I was in 5th grade, we moved to Mount Clemens. So when I took catechism, I naturally wanted to go to the church that we had been in Roseville. So I took a Greyhound bus. And, those were the days you could let kids be out on their own. And so I did that every Saturday morning. And that was a church that my parents were married in. I was baptized there and then confirmed there. And in my confirmation class, there were like 40 some people. And I hate to brag, but I think I was the best one. Because the pastor asked me to listen to all the memory work. Kids had to memorize everything that was back in the day. They had to, all the verses, the Bible verses, and the meanings to the articles and 10 Commandments. But anyway, and I did know before I was even confirmed that I wanted to go to Capital, because I had a cousin that graduated from there, and I went to her graduation when I was 8 years old. So that was really, always in the back of my mind to go to Capital. But before that, a mission builder group came to Mount Clemens, and they started a mission in Mount Clemens of the ALC Lutheran Church. And so I got involved with that when I was in high school. And Ray Wolf was our pastor. And so he went on to work at Capital too. And that was a really good opportunity to be in Luther League and, be with other kids that were Lutheran. So that was a mission church. The other one was an older church that, like my grandfather, had been on the building committee. And he was a contractor in Detroit. He built a lot of the old houses in Detroit. So when we changed to our mission church, it was a lot of hands-on things that my family got involved in. And it was just a really good time in the church. It was a small building. We got married. My husband and I, Dick, got married there. And there were folding chairs. But we still had candles attached to the folding chairs. It sounds pretty scary now, doesn't it?
Like, what do you mean by attached? Like off the side, kind of?
Yeah, off the side of the chair. They had a candle holder with the candle stuck in it. It had to be a candlelight service, of course.
Yeah.
But so many years ago, my goodness, that was in 1962. From there, we were, I went to Capital as a freshman. That's when I met Richard Walston, and we dated all through college. We got married before our senior year. And then I taught school in Columbus, and he finished up his college and seminary. So we were in Columbus, like 8 years. And that was really a good time. We were house parents on campus. in 2 different houses that they used to have girls live in. And
Sorry, and
yeah,
just for myself and for people that might be listening,
yeah,
explain what the house parent role
yeah,
was.
yeah. We had to make sure that the girls were in at a certain time during week. It was like 10:30, and on the weekend it was 11 or 12. We locked the doors then and made sure they were okay. But girls had fun too.
Yeah.
So after we were done with that, we found out that there was a front porch and some boys were sneaking in, and we had no idea. But they were good girls, really. It was fun to be house parents.
So, and he was a house
He
parent for the boys' house then,
No,
respectively, or
he
no?
just was my spouse. I mean, he was just living there.
Oh,
I
you were
was
married by that point.
We were
Yes.
married, yeah. I was the house mother, and then he was a seminarian at
Okay.
that point. Yeah.
Were you in the same class?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was like a job that you were not an undergraduate student overseeing the house. You were like a
I was
graduate.
a graduate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was something unusual. They really needed house mothers, and I guess there were a lot of students that needed to live off campus. And I was teaching as well as being a house mother,
Mm.
and that was unheard of. Usually, the house mother just stayed home all the time. But that was kind of a special, special thing that we got to do. It was very good
Yeah.
for our budget.
What did you say? Was that a paid position, or was it just you got to live in the house?
Yeah, you just got to live in the house. Yeah, which was a lot.
Yeah.
A lot to have the university pay for our housing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And how many girls lived in the house then?
Well, the first one, I think there were 12, and then the next one, I think there were like 15 or more.
How big of a house was it?
Yeah, it was, well, they were big. I don't know if anybody remembers the big Pfeiffer house. It was like a big brick, almost like a castle. It had a third floor, so there were 4 girls up on the third floor, and like numerous bedrooms, so 2 in a bedroom. And the laundry was in the basement, and what you'd expect. They came in the side door. We used the front door, and it was kind of divided so that we had our own kitchen and living room and bedroom.
Yeah. It's neat to hear about that. And I mean, there's little bits of that I think that have kind of survived in terms of like, I know there are, shoot, I forget what the acronym stands for, but SRAs, which are above the RAs that are graduate students today.
Sure.
So I guess that's a little bit of a successor to that. Of course, some of the curfew and those kind of things aren't around any. And in my understanding is those went away not too long after you were there, sometime like late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to hear about that. And the one thing I imagine that might have been a big kind of advantage of that is the intentional community aspect of that. Like I assume part of overseeing that group was you were connecting with everybody in the house. And I know one issue that was dealt with on campus today is like you can have students that they live there and they go to class there, but they don't get involved there. And it's hard to like if somebody doesn't go to events, it's hard to connect with them. And so, but they for better or worse, I assume they couldn't really hide from you, right?
Right. We had house meetings, and I always would treat them to cookies and whatever snack I could get together, and they liked that. We were really good friends with them. One of the students was an art student, and I said, "Oh, we would love to have a painting that you do of the seminary. We would just love that." And so she went out and took her sketchbook, and she came back 10 minutes later. It's still there on the wall. It's behind you here. We have had that all these years. You can see it's a watercolor, and it's like beautiful. It just is such a good painting that we enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I guess on the other side of campus, then, what from your perspective was Dick's seminary experience like?
I think he really enjoyed classes. I know he struggled with Greek.
But we still do today.
Do you?
Although I think it's a little easier today than back then. We got the computers and all that.
Yeah.
But
Well, the other thing is the preaching part, I think, was a good. There was one professor that really was so good about giving the idea about making the sermon speak to who was listening. he always had a really good way of talking in his sermon about stories that kind of brought the message, I think. I mean, maybe I'm prejudiced.
no, that's
But it's amazing because that professor is not there anymore, of course, but his grandson, now it's not his son, his grandson is the owner or one of the owners of this building. I mean,
a small world.
yes, yes. It was amazing when I found that out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
It's just like everything comes around, the longer you live,
Yeah.
the more things come around and make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really neat. Was there an internship that he
Yeah.
did at that point?
Yes, he did. And so we had to leave our girl, the house where we were house parents, and we packed up a U-Haul, drove to Vienna, Virginia, which is.
And they just told you were going to.
Yeah, they just assigned us that position, or got Dick that position. I say us because I feel like, I had to travel too, but
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second. Yeah.
yeah. But this U-Haul, we were driving and towing our car, and we got really in trouble at one point in the middle of the night, and oh my goodness, I was so glad once we got there safely. That's a whole nother story, but it was a really good internship for him. It's just outside of Washington, D.C., and we did a lot of things in Washington, and a lot of company came to visit us, and the church was a thriving, suburb type place, and the pastor that he worked with was just a really great guy. So it was a good experience for both of us.
So I guess I'll ask then. I'm sure we'll keep coming back to this as we talk about
Okay.
your adult life. But when you started dating, I guess first of all, when he was an undergrad, did he know he wanted to be a pastor?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you knew that he wanted to be a pastor, did you have any idea of what all that would come with for you, for better or worse? It's all these things.
I guess I really was pretty naive about it, but I liked him well enough, and I could see, what abilities he had, and how kind, and that would be a good profession for him. So I didn't really think about it that much.
Yeah.
But the president of the seminary talked to the women that were married to seminarians, and he said, you don't have to do everything in the church. People might expect that, but you don't need to do that. Your primary job is to take care of your husband and your family. Not be in every committee or do everything when you're in a church.
Yeah.
So that was really something that I remembered, and I didn't feel pressure to do a lot or too much, or I did what I liked. I liked to sing in the choir. I liked teaching kids, so I did stuff like that.
Yeah. No, that's and you mentioned so teaching. Is that what your undergrad was
Yeah,
in, and that was your primary profession?
right,
Yeah.
right. I taught here in Columbus for 3 years. I didn't teach while we had a lot of, we had 4 kids, so I was pretty busy. But after they were all in school, I got a job and I taught for a few years in Michigan. So that was good, you know, first grade.
Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was fine.
Yeah.
And there was this little kid that was so cute. He said, "Hey, Mrs. Walston, I hear you're going to be a grandma." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're going to love it."
Like he knew.
Like a first grader knows. Yeah. So that, was always fun for me. And, Dick supported me in all of that too. He was glad that I could, teach and do things that were what I like to do.
Yeah. So you mentioned Michigan. Is that where he did most of his ministry then?
Yes. Yes, all of it. There were 4 different churches that he was called. The first one was up near Alpena. The next one was in Detroit, which was really nice because we were really close to my family in that area. They were just a couple of, maybe an hour from us sometimes. And then from there, we went to Fowlerville, which is near East Lansing. And then the last one was in Grand Blanc, which is south of Flint. So 4. Yeah. And then when we moved to Columbus, he retired, early. Like he was 60, I think, when we retired. And we moved to Columbus and lived in German Village for a while. He put himself out to the synod to, preach, to help out. And he interviewed with Will Hartfelder in Westerville, and that's how he got there. And it's really funny because he was at Grace in Westerville for 13 years, and that's longer than
Yeah, I was gonna say because early retirement and
yeah,
4 calls. Yeah, I assume.
yeah. So it was really a good match. It really was a good. He and Will Hartfelder got along really well. They had a good time together, and Dick did things that he enjoyed. Didn't have to preach all the time.
Yeah,
But
because his main role there was visitation.
right,
Was,
right.
was that always kind of one of his passions
Yeah.
in ministry?
Yeah, I think he really liked visiting people, and not just people in the hospital, but he went to homes and, shut-ins and people that were just elderly. And but I bet you're interested because of you're in the seminary now, and you're probably interested in what will happen
Yeah,
in the future for you.
for sure. But I think I appreciate, and I want to follow up on a few things that we were talking about there. But
Yeah.
these conversations because I originally started as a history major in undergrad and ended up just being a minor. But I very much enjoy history, and I think that informs. It's a good way of understanding like where we are in the present. So I enjoy hearing about. I mean, really, all these things we talked about capital a bit, what it was like there at that time. I want to talk a little bit more about what ministry was like in some of these congregations and what being a pastor's spouse was like being in these congregations. But I enjoy getting to hear just
Mm.
these stories, and it's helpful for me. So yeah, actually, maybe I'll ask then. So how between the 4 different congregations that he was in, how did the role and expectations of the pastor's spouse vary? Like, were you did you have kind of a similar level of involvement in these congregations, or did they either want or allow kind of different things?
Yeah, I think I still did things that I enjoyed doing, but like if where I had little kids, and I'm sitting in the church service and they're all misbehaving, I can't sing in the choir at that point, but I did other things, like Bible school or Sunday school and teaching, and then Bible study with women.
Yeah.
You know, we had circles then, and I always tried to not be the main person. You know, I let the people there be leaders and not, you know, not take over. Like I didn't have to lead every single Bible study. I mean, I'm not even good at leading Bible study.
Oh, I'm sure you're great, but
No, I just, you know, it just makes me so nervous to do. And I think in a way when you do that, when you're like that, it encourages other people, you know, they say, well, I can try, you know, I can
yeah,
do that. So it's not bad not to be, you know, an expert.
yeah.
But I'm thinking I had two babies when we were up near Alpena, so I was pretty busy at home, and the the people were so kind, you know, when they knew we had a lot going on in our house. Like Dick's office was at the front of the house. Yeah. Our oldest son would run around without any clothes on. You know, just have his diaper on and he'd run around and whoever was in the office with Dick would, you know, they would understand. And then there was that was a parsonage, and in the parsonage they would have a Sunday school class in the basement. So, you know, we had to have everything pretty ship shape. You know, you don't.
Yeah.
Then this one in Detroit, we bought a house, so that was we had a lot more independence because we weren't right next door to the church, and there again, the kids were getting older by then, and I did a part-time job at the school, and I also did, you know, choir and things with the ladies. We did like an Easter breakfast, and I had all of the kids in the congregation help dye Easter eggs. We would go down to the market and get these tiny little eggs. They were the first eggs that hens make. They're pullet eggs. I don't know if you heard that or not ever. But we would just get dozens and dozens, and the kids had so much fun coloring them. And then they would put them like on an usher stand and with the usher's name on it or the organist's name by the organ. And, you know, then they had it for the Easter breakfast
Yeah.
for Easter Sunday. That was a big project to organize, and that's kind of what I did, like some offbeat things like that. In other words, anything, but they were fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah. The other church, let's see, in Fowlerville is when I got a full time job, and I was really busy teaching, but I still sang in the choir and I did Bible school, and because summers were okay to do extra things. And that was it was like a small town, so it was really different than being in the city like we had been. And then Grand Blanc was still, I was teaching then, and that was a different kind of congregation. It was one that was struggling a little bit, and they ended up building a whole new building. But before that, you know, people had left the congregation, and it was quite painful. But Dick got through it, you know, and he turned out okay, you know, after a lot of hard times. So coming to Columbus was kind of like our reward.
yeah.
Coming back to chapel choir concerts and, you know, just being
Yeah.
around Columbus is a good place.
And the Capitol was a really special place
Yeah.
for both of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask about, I guess, you and your faith experience being in that context. Both, you know, if there's anything I've sort of had to learn and accept exploring, you know, and accepting this calling into ministry is that once you're leading a congregation, you aren't being ministered to by it in the same way. Um,
I see.
and well, and I guess the other thing too is like he he was your pastor, right? Or at least the pastor that you interacted with
Mm-hmm.
the most. So I guess what was that like for you and your faith journey, or how did you? I'm
Oh,
sure that was a change from.
yeah, it was really special. I always, grew up knowing the gospel and believing and, enjoying the liturgy and hymns and choir. I sang in choirs since I was a little kid. And after Dick became a pastor, I could see how much work it was. It's not as easy as it looks. And so, I tried to understand. And, in the process, I think I learned so much, just by watching him. It's sort of like, when I refer to our our life together, I feel like I was almost like a minister too. I mean, I know I wasn't, but
No, I think you were.
well, it just seems like, I could see what he was trying or what he was doing and the good, and I thought, oh my goodness, that is such a good example, and it has very much strengthened my my beliefs and my understanding of, liturgy or, the message in the gospel. And when something comes up, I can kind of see maybe more than I would have seen had I not been married to a minister. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. That does make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, think about those things in different ways. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And it's sort of like he was so kind and and helpful that he was like that at home too, and to me, to our kids. It was really special, really meant to be, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, yeah, kind and helpful definitely describe, yeah, how he always was to me and
Mm-hmm.
my family. And cause is there a particular like if I could interview him, like what story would you want told? Is there a particular couple of things that really come to mind about him in ministry?
He had great empathy for the Holocaust victims, and he, tried to do reading. And then both of us were fortunate enough to go on a seminar with a rabbi back in Detroit area, and we heard lectures, and we went to Poland and saw concentration camps, and went then on to Israel and saw the Jewish life that's there now. We heard many Holocaust survivors and heard their stories and how they've come through and their families, have come through. So that was one of his, things. And it was because when he was a kid at home, they had a refugee girl that stayed at their house, and she was telling stories when he was like, just a young kid. And so that probably sparked that interest for him. But that goes along with the history that you mentioned, the history of that war and that time was pretty powerful. I'm trying to think other interests and things about what was the question again?
Like if I could interview him, like what story would you want him to tell? Or there's just something from his time in ministry or just
Yeah, I think Also, he would talk about being on the farm, and because so many things in the Bible are like farm related, and he just had all that experience growing up that he was able to relate the stories and make them real, I think. So maybe his home life.
So he grew up on a farm. Did you grow up on a farm? But no,
No,
no.
no, no, I was a city girl.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's why you took the Greyhound bus, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the okay.
Yeah, it was different. And I mean, my relatives, my ancestors were farmers, but not my dad or my mom. So we were in the city mostly. Yeah.
So what do you think it means to be Lutheran?
It means that you're free to love people. And, I think accept what happens and believe that God is with you and you're never alone. And, every morning I listen to hymns, and it's sort of like I can't really start the day without listening to all those wonderful hymns, and just, the words just go through my head and remind me.
So what's giving you concern for the future of the church, and what's giving you hope for the future of the church?
I have to tell you what is hopeful is this technology. I think there's more and more good stuff coming from that. I see it, not only in you, but I see it in my granddaughter who works with videos, and, she does things in her church service to record the service and so on. And I think that is being something that's going to help, because I think we need to reach out more. And so that's maybe the sad part, is that there aren't a lot of people in church anymore. They're doing other things, and I don't know why. I guess they're dying.
Yeah, we could fill up some. Well, and I probably will doing these interviews. Everybody has their theories for that. But yeah, I agree that I think there are a lot of means to reaching out to people, and I think first we need to I asked that question, what does it mean to be Lutheran, or even larger, what does it mean to be Christian? What's that core message? And I think first we need to really remember that, but then we have the means to spread that, I think, and I think there are a lot of people that are open to that too. They
Sure.
just have to that, and talk about history, and because the fact that a lot of these things are going on, even just the number of students in seminary obviously is a concern, like that. Yeah, well, yeah, it used to be like hearing about, way back when there were more people in church, I would see that as like a negative thing, but I think I've kind of finally come around to the point where I can see that as like okay, let's break down like why was that the case? Because I think when you do that, you can start to realize what the ingredients were for that situation. You may be able to learn from those, and I made the reference earlier when we were talking about the houses on campus, and involvement, and the contemporary issues about students that aren't engaged on campus. And not saying we need to like bring back that model, but if nothing else, like that could be an explanation of like why that engagement isn't as high. So if that's not there, then what are we going to do instead to drive that engagement?
Yeah, what you say kind of ties into what I feel like is happening with me living here in this retire. It's at a senior living place. And I feel like I am an example. I can be friendly, I can smile, and a lot of people need just a smile and just someone to talk to. And it's not like I'm, giving them Bible verses or sermons or anything, but I'm being a friend. And I feel like it's almost like a ministry that, I'm meant to be here
Yeah.
and be an example.
Well, and I think you have an opportunity to be an example too, because I think as I was remarking in the elevator on the way up, in some ways it's kind of silly that the only times in life that we live in a, intentional close quarters community like this are college and retirement. And, why is that? Because, I mean, probably a decent chunk of the people here are living by themselves, right?
Yeah.
So very easily, all of these people could be in their, separate houses and not run into each other, just
Right.
because of the layout of the,
Yeah, and so
but
they don't talk to
yeah,
people. And so, this is getting people engaged. And, like we'll walk downstairs, in a little bit, and you'll see how much fun is going on at that bar. People are engaged, they're talking to each other, and they're being
Mm.
friends, and they're learning about each other. And it seems like that's kind of what we need to do more of.
Well, and I think that's what the church can be. Well, that's
Yeah.
a term I heard for that is third places. So like, your first place is your home, and your second place is like work. And that like there's been a severe decline in these like third places where people meet. And that's an essential part of
Yeah.
how all kinds of things happen in society. So I think actually there's maybe a growing hunger for that in a way. There are a lot of people that are, you hear about loneliness and these kind of things.
Yeah.
And so maybe the church can really take this model here a little bit of, let's do events, or heck, we'll build a apartment complex off the church or something. I don't know, but
Well, when I first moved here, I thought this is like coming to a resort. It's so beautiful here. And and then I thought, well, I was just as excited when I moved into the dorm at Capitol as I am living here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just very fun, and very, I've learned to, be happy here, and I don't miss being in my house. I never, but it's also where my daughter is in the neighborhood here.
Yeah.
So that was another reason to move here from Westerville.
Yeah, no, I think that's and that, I think that speaks to too, like the societal thoughts about like what makes a good life versus what's an actuality of like, you don't necessarily need like a big place to be happy. If anything, having a big place can sometimes get in the way of happiness connection. I imagine that the space that you have that's yours here is probably smaller than a lot of the houses you've lived in, but it sounds like really happy here, and you're able to connect, and so maybe that's the other thing the church really can offer is kind of an alternate way of thinking about that. That's so
it's a challenge.
So but building intentional community, I think that's something the church can really get behind, and that can be a source of hope for a lot of people. So but I always like to end with a prayer.
Yeah.
So go ahead and do that. I'll
Yes.
do that. Heavenly Father, thank you for this wonderful conversation, and just opportunity to catch up with somebody who has been there for me through several stages of this journey in the ministry. Just thank you for Janet, and the ways that you've been able to use her throughout the years, and the ways that you're working through her now and in this ministry in this new place. And just let her be an example and a reminder to the importance of reaching out to people, and being a friendly face and building a community, and how building that community can be a pathway towards you. We just pray all these things in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to my interview with Janet Walston. If you haven't already, remember to follow this podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Mighty Fortress Is Our Pod is a production of Mighty Fortress Media. The views and opinions expressed are those of the guests and the host, and are not intended to represent the views and opinions of any Lutheran church body. Be sure to follow this show on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.